Oops, it's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Welcome to the Bardbecue, where the cast and creators of Oops All Bards grill each other about the most recent episode. I'm your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, and I'm joined at the table by several of our bards. Joining today, we've got some of the bards. We're an incomplete party this evening. Ashley Banks was not able to join us tonight, but let's have the rest of the players reintroduce themselves.
I'm Chris Klinecki. I play Ruckus, the aspiring best boy.
I'm Anne Coleman, and I play Clarice, Sauercloud.
I'm Ross Curry. I play Andrew Carrollhold.
I'm Bob Killian. I play Keylonian Stumps, the guitar-playing pacifist.
And with us, as always, also is Nate Runkle, our producer. And I am Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, although anybody who calls me anything other than Jill makes me worry that I have done something to offend them. So what we're going to do for these episodes that are coming in between the regular campaign episodes of Oops All Bards, it's just an opportunity for us to talk about what just happened, any questions we have for each other, any questions the players have for me. Eventually, this is only our first one of these, but eventually, hopefully, we'll have some questions from you with the listeners as well that we'll be able to answer. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I'd really love to start talking about, episode 1 was an opportunity to introduce everyone's characters. We did a lot of work before the recording on developing everybody's characters, but what I'd love to know is if anybody was surprised either by something that came up in your introduction scene or something that came up in somebody else's scene that you weren't expecting.
I don't know about surprised, but one of the things I really liked about, we started with Belle and her whole chaotic family, and then moved immediately to Clarice in a very isolated situation. I thought that was really well structured, especially because when I listened back, Belle describes herself as being just curves everywhere, and then Clarice comes across in very sharp, pointed. Everything is angular. I just thought that was a very interesting first two characters to introduce. And for the DM, I'm wondering, was that set up intentional?
That was a very happy coincidence. It's really too bad that Ashley's not here to be able to talk a little bit about Belle, but I know that Anne and I spent a lot of time talking about Clarice and how Clarice was going to present herself as more of a loner, as somebody who was not going to be surrounded by her family on this day. So, Anne, did you want to talk a little bit more about the way that we kind of worked through developing Clarice?
Sure. I started actually with a bit of a challenge because I've never played a bard before, and I didn't want to commit myself to either of the sort of core archetypes that I know for bard, which is the songs all the time bard, or the sort of lascivious, lecherous bard. And in thinking about the different colleges and ways that bards can specialize, I found myself really drawn to a bard who plays with sarcasm and who uses words as their tool, but in a perhaps less conventional way than speechifying. Although obviously we get a little bit of creative talking from Clarice. But all of that led me to thinking about when Aubrey Plaza, the actress, plays April Ludgate on Parks and Rec, the episode where, if you're familiar, the Pawnee Township has just merged with its rival town. And the character gets to meet her counterpart in the other town's administration named Tinnifer. And Tinnifer is just one of the worst humans. She has a very affected manner of speaking. She's very superficial. And the character, as played by Aubrey Plaza, does some really fun layering of personalities where she is performing as Tinnifer's equal and familiar, while also performing her character of April Ludgate at the same time. And I thought that was a really intriguing thing to play around with. And so that's what I riffed on. That's where we get the really infuriating sort of vocal fry. I think it's a fun start. I don't know how closely Clarice's journey will sort of cleave to that narrative, but because I needed some way to enter Bards, I really took inspiration from that performance by Aubrey Plaza, and similar to the character of April Ludgate, Plaza plays, a very anti-human, not necessarily misanthropic. She has the people that she loves, but she only loves them. She has little time or patience for others. And I thought that would be a fun thing to play around with.
I have just a comment on Clarice's character. I think that it's really cool that Clarice is like a loner character, and then you've developed this loner character, but in fact, Clarice's family is a very important part of the story and her character, which I think is a really neat thing. I think if I were making a loner character, I think I would have maybe not thought about that as much, or included that, but it works really well with Clarice's character, and it works really well with the story, and gives a reason to gives more motivation, like to be part of the things that are happening, which I think is really cool. And if I may, as someone who's played Dungeons and Dragons a lot, I think it is a great thing if you're starting a campaign or you're doing something, is to give your characters some relationship to each other, or some relationship to what's happening in the storyline. I've found that has really helped character players in the past, and made like role playing really fun. So I think good job with that. And I think we did a good job as a team as well, thinking about how our characters would know each other or be related.
Yeah, we did I made a little diagram at the beginning, if you'll all remember, of the kind of solid and dotted lines between all of the characters' relationships, and everybody had at least a dotted line to everybody else, because the beginning of this campaign is set at a university, and it's not a huge school such that you wouldn't have at least encountered each other on the go. And certainly Clarice working in the campus coffee shop allows Clarice to kind of be a nexus point for all of these people. So in spite of being a loner, Clarice is actually possibly the one who's got the strongest bonds to everybody else in the party.
Yeah, I also took inspiration from another real world context piece. I really appreciate, Bob, what you were saying about how she's connected to this world. And that was one of the pieces I gave more careful thought. And I took particular inspiration from the 90s political power couple of James Carville and Mary Madeline. So for those who don't know, in the 1992 presidential election, James Carville was sort of the chief political strategist of Bill Clinton's campaign, and his wife, Mary Madeline, was the chief political strategist of the Bush second campaign. And they are still happily married, longtime couple. They have worked against each other in many elections and have very different closely held beliefs, but they are also real power players in the U.S. political scene. James Carville, famously nicknamed the Ragin' Cajun, continues to be a pretty colorful pundit in Democratic political conversation, although he is definitely more unhinged than he was in the 92 election. And Mary Madeline, who maintains a little bit less public punditry, is equally interesting if you do a deep dive into her work. And while that particular couple has no children, I thought, thinking about somebody who is the child of that legacy, you could come up with some really interesting ties to the world and relationships to not just government, but also to people. Having lived with two people who think so strategically about every human interaction and about the interplay of power, I think would really shape a young person in untold ways.
That is really cool.
Yeah, in the first episode, when you had that letter from your mother that was signed with her full name, including Esquire, and then scribbled out, and Mom, but then also referencing who you were going to do your internship or post grad with, whether it was I think it was the Violets or the Greens. Kind of wondering like what, and this is maybe more a question for Jill. Like, we know that there's the triarchy. We've established that there's the Violets, the Greens, and was it turquoise?
The Corals.
The Corals. kind of like what each of these parties in the triarchy, because I think we would each know, we've all been living in this world, we would each know kind of what can you tell us about how the triarchy functions and how these parties interact with each other.
So Anne and I did a lot of talking about some of this structure because as the child of political operatives, she would be intimately acquainted with this in a way that your average college student might not be. I mean, I was in school in the early through mid-aughts, and it was, during the George W. Bush administration. He was reelected when I was in college, and the people that I was in school with were kind of divided into people who cared deeply about the Bush-Kerry election and the war in Iraq, and people who just did not care, were very oblivious. And in a lot of ways, and this is funny for anybody who knows me now, I was pretty separated from what was going on politically at the time. And so I think that for the most part, the student body, I mean, this is a country that's been at peace for 30 years. I think the student body in Udvara, at Mage and Marshall, in the country of Udvara, are aware that there is a triarchy. They're aware that there are 3 major political parties. That the legislature is set up kind of more like a parliamentary system. But I don't think that there is a lot of awareness for most of you at this point that there are major distinctions between the parties. I think the only other person in the party who might know that is Belle, because her family is involved in politics. But I think for the most part, it's not something that is on your daily radar. Although Kelonian, or Bob as Kelonian, I would be really curious to know, since you're a pacifist, whether you think that Kelonian is paying attention to the political landscape in Udvara at this time.
Yeah, so, well, I think Bob doesn't know enough about the political landscape to have a good to make a good thought on that. But I think maybe there's an opportunity for that as we keep going, because I think for Kelonian's character, I think I've really kind of crafted it as like a personal journey. He's like sort of trying to discover some wisdom in the world, and so. But I think he doesn't really have a connection to the world. I don't think we had too many specifics, but I think we just established that he's sort of from like far away, maybe there aren't many like turtles around. It's sort of part of the turtle lore that they go out and they go sort of traveling and adventuring around the world. And so I imagined that he was from somewhere far off, but I think maybe through the campaign, it could be an opportunity for him to figure out where he fits in the landscape or doesn't fit.
Surprise question or comment. Would Kelonian be someone who would see them all as different shades of the problem?
Possibly. Yeah. Like I think it could be. But because I think Kelonian is trying to sort of think of or figure out where he fits, because I think he is somebody who stands back and watches or learns or experiences, but he's being thrown into this world of where he has to act, and so I'm not sure yet. I think we're gonna find out like what Kelonian is, how Kelonian's gonna evolve in that world.
There was something else that really surprised me about Kelonian in this episode, which is when you talked about he kind of creaks as he's standing up. And I think Chris had jokingly asked how old he is, and you'd said he's 24. Is that so? 24 is older it's middle aged for a turtle. And that had really surprised me that you'd made that choice. That he's kind of like this non-traditional student. He's older than most of his peers, at least in maturity levels. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, there wasn't, because I think I thought turtles were about the same, or maybe I was looking at the wrong information about turtles, because I thought that was like older, but like I thought they had a comparable age to
I think they lived to 60 or 70 is what I had seen, but it's okay because you rolled with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would make sense. He's the sort of the character who appreciates learning and wisdom, and so would not feel any shame or weirdness in pursuing a learning path maybe later than his peers. So yeah.
So speaking of characters that are maybe on a non-traditional path and really interested in pursuing wisdom, Chris, you're playing a character that is of a lineage that doesn't usually attend or pursue higher education. And you gave yourself the added challenge of not being able to speak the common tongue with everybody else. You can understand it, but you're communicating largely through bark buttons. And then we have Ruckus's internal monologue to kind of help guide us. I'm really curious about your decision to create the character in this way, to give yourself that limitation.
So first and foremost, it's really important for me to emphasize that it's critical for me to be respectful as I'm attempting to play a character who doesn't speak the native language. I don't in any way intend to be jabbing or punching down at anybody who finds verbal communication in their own communities to be challenging. Not at all. Rather, in a way, I'm trying to empathize. As some of you at the table might know, I majored in Mandarin Chinese and lived for 3.5 years in China, including a full 3-year stint. And the first iteration of that across the years, 3.5 years, was a summer teaching English in China before I studied any Chinese at all. I didn't speak a lick of it. It was incredibly challenging to be able to communicate at all with people who also really didn't speak any English. We weren't in like a major city center like Beijing or Shanghai. But I found everybody that I interacted with to be incredibly helpful, incredibly supportive, and very friendly and understanding of kind of like how I was trying to do my best to ask where the restaurants were, or like how to do my laundry, or where's a bathroom, please, or I'm thirsty. And I picked up around 10 to 20 words during that first summer, which ends up kind of where Ruckus is right now, right, at level 4. I've had a lot of experiences not being able to articulate myself as a full person, even though I might hopefully have a vibrant inner life or inner monologue. But just, I can say, yes, I like this, or please and thank you. But if somebody were to ask me, like, what do you think about this piece of art? I could be like, it's pretty. I like the colors, but I can't really tell you. Oh, it reminds me of the neoclassical era. Like, I don't have the vocabulary to do that. So I wanted to explain that first, as like this is where the Ruckus stuff is coming from in an angle. There's another part of it too. As those of us at the table will recall, for our session 0, when we sat down before we started the campaign, we essentially had what I would think of as like character selection screen, like where people were either going to say which character they were playing or say like, I have like 1 or 2 ideas, like which one's going to make more sense. I prepared 4 characters and intentionally volunteered to go last so that my character could fit in, hopefully with what everybody else wanted to bring to the table. Of those 4 characters, and over the course of that conversation, it was pretty clear to me from the other players and from you, Jill, that I needed to pick Ruckus that iteration as the 5th party member. So that was sort of like the other ones all spoke common natively. This is the one that didn't, but this is the one we went with. Finally, just from like a, what do I find interesting at a table, and what do I find engaging, and is something like a project that I enjoy working on. Characters with a strong, memorable like hooks are pretty essential to me. For my own RPG gaming experience, those are really the only characters I'm like interested in exploring. This character is part dog, and I think many of us have seen the YouTube videos of dogs that have been trained to communicate with buttons to say basic things, and so
I follow so many of those accounts.
That really appealed to me as like this could be an interesting character that would set themselves apart from the rest of the party, and hopefully an interesting and not boring way, would hopefully be one that people who are listening in, hi everybody, people who are listening in be like, oh, I've seen one of those videos, or I kind of get what this is going for, and that's kind of fun. And also the character is, a capital G good character, so hopefully, going with the dog folk, going with somebody who's making you sort of recall videos that hopefully charm you or experiences that make you smile was important to me too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just add on to that, because Ruckus he's a dog folk. That's a homebrewed race. That's not my homebrew. That's your homebrew from one of your home games. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about dog folks as you first created them or first imagined them.
The initial dog folk in a separate campaign that we won't really engage in, but they serve as essentially the police force in the capital city. And that's their main job. Like, you don't really encounter them anywhere else. And at least in that iteration of the world, the idea was we don't know like which race we can really trust to do a good job with this. They're all like, they had their ulterior motives. And this particular group, like, they seem to just be in it for, the justice and good. So like all the other factions sort of collectively agree to submit to, okay, like if a dog folk pulls me over, like I'm going to say, okay, I was probably in the wrong. And they have like their own little like judicial system. But it started there. And so when it came time to bring one or more characters to this campaign, I had a good enough time with the dog folk in my own campaign. I figured I'd throw that into the mix, and that was the one that came out.
Hey, Chris, I got to jump in here because you have not shared what you actually said at that session 0 was the inspiration.
What did I say? It was a long time ago.
I'm
Many
thinking
moons ago.
of the iconic late 90s blockbuster film series, Air Bud.
Yeah, I mean that I think we've sort of edited that out along the way, by and large. But other things that you may have seen in the '90s, where I grew up, and like a lot of those things are near and dear to me. Not just Air Bud, but like Homeward Bound. There's a line where Shadow tells Chance that dogs are supposed to be faithful, loyal, and true, and that is an exact soundbite that I pulled in my my lead for my description of characters. Other things as well. I talked about Snoopy earlier at this particular recording for episode 3. We might see some of that later. But yeah, homages to dogs that are near and dear to me from my childhood. Yeah.
The only reason I brought up the Air Bud is because I like that you've stayed in sort of the same color palette now that we're going with like it's a Tibetan, right?
Tibetan Mastiff.
Yeah.
Is
So you have that sort of like warm reddish ochre that's also in the Golden Retriever and Irish Setter lines.
Gold Retrievers are good.
As someone who played in the game where that Chris is mentioning that the dog folk were introduced, I just want to point out a fun fact that our characters once got some help from a dog folk prison guard by consistently telling him that he was a good boy.
Yeah.
Amazing.
No persuasion checks were required in that session.
Yes.
Amazing. So just to kind of catch the audience up, we are recording this after we recorded episode 3. So you're hearing a couple of references to things that happened later. I hope that there are no spoilers, but there might be a couple of tantalizing hints. And I think that, right now, as far as the audience is concerned, we're at the end of episode 1, and we're just starting to see the characters as individuals. Now, you all around the table have a better idea of, what's going to happen next and how the characters are going to coalesce. But as we came into episode 1, I'm curious what you were all expecting would be the point at which you intersected.
I had no idea.
I'm chuckling in the corner here because I have dutifully written down everybody's coffee order for their character.
I actually did want to circle back to that because one of the things thinking about like developing characters that I don't think was intentional was Clarice's thing was that she remembers every single customer at Enchanted Grounds order. That also put it on all of us to think about what our order might be, and that became a weird like kind of internal exercise of like, okay, what would my character be drinking while studying, reading the things that he's reading?
And you haven't actually said anything about your character yet, so I'm going to turn it on you. Why'd you choose a red eye?
Let's go to, I'm probably the person here who has the least performance background experience. I did theater in high school and college, but almost nothing since, there are a couple very seasoned voice actors here, which I'm not. So I came into this thinking, well, what's something that I want to play just as a Dungeons and Dragons character? Like and for me, I thought about the same things that Anne did in terms of like, well, I literally have never played a bard because again, I don't have a very good singing voice. I don't like some of the bard tropes. So I was digging for something that was very much not in that vein. They're not a sponsor, but I will say I absolutely adore the Tal'Dorei Reborn campaign setting book. It is a tremendous source book. And I was really drawn to the College of Tragedy Bard, and mechanically I decided I wanted to play that and then so I started with the mechanics and then built, okay, what type of person would study this, and built from there. The red eye is specifically because when I'm thinking about it, Andric is someone who would study late at night because he prefers solitude. Not to say he's antisocial. In fact, he's very much not. But in terms of doing deep thought, he's doing that on his own in that study room with just the gramophone. Like, that is his normal course of work. I borrowed that a little bit from my wife, the DM, who does a lot of her best deep work late at night.
I was going to ask you if any of that was a subtle dig at me.
It was not at all a dig. It is just drawn from, I live every day with, I have to ask Jill what time she came to bed the previous night.
You don't have to ask me that.
But I did.
It's 9 a.m. somewhere, right? Yeah,
But the answer is, I decided that he was going to be a late night studier, and Red Eye made sense for that.
Do any of you have any questions for me about?
Yes.
Yes.
An all bard party. What were you as the DM thinking?
Honestly, it's been an inside joke for so long in one of the campaigns that you DM. So Ross, yes, if you didn't notice from Ross's previous answer, Ross is my husband. We've been married for 11 years now. And so Ross runs 2 other home games that I play in. And at some point in one of those campaigns, we were just musing over what would happen if you had if your party balance was thrown off because you had too many people of one certain class. And I will say that also everybody here at this table, save for Nate, played in a campaign that was run by our friend Michael, who's one of the members of the Porch Room and so one of the executive producers of this podcast. And Michael is the nicest person in the world. And so anytime somebody said, I'm really curious about D&D, I'd like to play, he'd say, sure, come on, join the game, which sometimes meant that we would have 11 people playing at the same time. And that sometimes meant that we would have 2 clerics or 3 sorcerers. Maybe there was a lot of overlap.
It's a very heavily magic user party.
It was a very, very heavy magic party. And so we were telling our friends in our home game about that. And I play a bard in that game, in our home game. So we were telling the people in our home game about this game that Michael ran. And I was saying, I think it'd be really fun if there was an all bard party. And I think it was our friend Eddie who's in that party. And Eddie did all of the art for Oops All Bards. And I think Eddie actually said, Oops All Bards. It was like, yep, that's it. And it stayed in my head. And I kind of just had to run with it. So Nate and I had been talking about making a podcast together. And it was like, hey, I have this crazy idea. And for some reason, Nate said that he would do it.
Yes, for some reason. No, I thought it was fascinating. One of the main tenets of podcasting is to always niche down, and this is like the ultimate. It's already a niche podcast, but then to kind of double that and hyper focus on one class. I was immediately just like, oh, this is something that could definitely work.
Eddie, if you're listening now, oops, all patents.
Oops, all
Better luck
trademarks.
next time, Eddie. And thanks.
I gotta ask, as you're talking, Nate, what did you know about D&D when you were agreeing to that?
Okay, so my D&D background, very limited, but is all based in high school. And I'm older than everyone here. I'm 46, so high school was early 90s. And primarily, what would that have been? Second edition, right? AD&D. I came into this and was like, oh, there are a lot new rules. there's a lot more going on here.
It's funny that you say that as a second edition player, because I started in 95 or 96, which was also second edition. And I feel like 5e is much more streamlined than 2e was, even than 3.5 was, and certainly more streamlined than 4 was.
And now we're playing Inside Baseball.
Sorry.
No, I think that there are definitely folks who are going to be listening to this who have been playing D&D for a long time. I think that there are also folks who are going to be playing who are going to be listening to this who are pretty new to D&D. And maybe, in fact, I know for a fact that there are people who are listening to this podcast who've never played D&D before. So before we wrap up this episode, I'd really love to just go around the table and get one piece of advice from everybody about what you'd like to say to somebody who's either just starting to play D&D or maybe has played D&D but isn't familiar with stretching outside of their comfort zone in a game like this.
Biggest piece of advice I would give a player is to just take big swings. Take the swing.
Yeah, I would say it's a game. Have fun. And there's a lot of different ways to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I've played those in different ways. Some people really like the role playing. They really like to do voices and characters and interact with each other, almost like they're doing improv. And that's really fun. Some people really like the game mechanics and, being able to make, really efficiently make your character so that it's like a powerful build or whatever. There's just a lot of different ways to play it, and I think that when you are getting together with people who want to play together, is that you should play it in the way that is really fun to you, and think about what would be the most fun.
Bob speaks my mind. The only thing I might add is that you have to trust in your DM and the players that you're playing with, that they will help you to not take up too much space. Because that's one of the things that I think, at least for me, in trying to take big swings can often feel like a risk, that the game is supposed to be fun for everybody and you don't want to monopolize the mic, literally or figuratively. But when you trust in your group and you've sort of established clearly that you're open to feedback and that you are happy for when other people have their ideas and you want to run with those too, there can be balance and joy.
Yes to everything. And I'd also say, at least from my own experience, the most successful sessions and campaigns that I've been a part of have been ones where it's like a big group of yes and to everybody. And generally speaking, everybody at the table has volunteered to spend their time with each other with a collective understanding of what we get out of this depends on what we put into this. And so having a good idea for yourself of like, what are you hoping to get out of this? Like if you aren't as engaged as somebody else in the role playing or the combat, is there something else that like you actually do enjoy? Chatting, spending time with your friends, spending money, if that's like a cool thing for you to do. Make sure you have think about what you would most enjoy. Make sure you communicate that to your players, that they understand and can yes and when you're hoping for a chance to do the thing that you're here for.
Nate, I realize that you're not playing 5e, but do you have any advice that you'd like to share?
No, but not really. But the one thing that I would add is, Bob, you were talking about what different people get out of it. My pure enjoyment of Dungeons and Dragons, in any instance that I've ever played it, or any kind of other role playing game, is literally just rolling dice. I just like rolling dice.
Ross just threw his arms in the air. I have forbidden Ross from bringing any more dice into our home. And then, of course, as our first recording, as a gift to everybody in the cast for our first recording, I bought a set of dice for everybody. But that's the last set of dice that Ross is going to be responsible for in this home for some time. So it's on the record now. My piece of advice for...
I did not agree to this.
We'll see. My piece of advice for folks who are just getting started in D&D or who are trying to get more involved in it is, podcasts like this one and like some of the other really big podcasts are wonderful and they're extremely helpful in learning how to play the game. So listen to them when you have the opportunity to. But the flip side of that is don't expect everything that happens at your table to be like what happens in a podcast. You're not going to have a DM probably who does a bunch of voices like Brennan Lee Mulligan or Matt Mercer. You're not going to have a bunch of people who have been playing D&D for 15, 20 years and really know all the game's ins and outs. But that doesn't mean that your experience should be disappointing or insufficient for you if it doesn't seem the way that you watch other people who are doing this professionally, the way that they're playing the game. So watch those to get ideas, to get inspiration, to learn some of the mechanics, but don't watch them with the expectation that you will have the same experience.
You also are not going to have an editor or a producer.
Yes.
Not to be me, but you know what I mean? Like, so like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that gets cut out of these episodes that is, you know, a lot of breaking down rules or trying to better understand, you know, a room layout or a map and stuff like that. So, you know, when you don't think that what you are playing is going to come across, hopefully, as smooth as this show has.
I don't mean to dogpile on this point, but I think I might piggyback if I may, if there's
Sure.
time. I would say don't be afraid to make mistakes. And you like, although some people may find it extremely helpful to sort of pour through a bunch of, you know, manuals, the player's handbook, you know, videos, watch other people play it first before you feel ready. That's totally fine. It's also okay to take the fail forward approach. I was in a campaign for about a half a year for my first experience in D&D, and I thought to myself, this reminds me enough of Knights of the Old Republic and World of Warcraft, so I'll read 15% of the player's handbook, enough that I can start my own thing, and then I'll just, you know, roll with it from there. Was I great at the beginning? Absolutely not. Have I gotten better? Hopefully. But that campaign is in its 5th year, and every session, every story arc gets better. So I don't think that you have to feel like you need to do all this sort of research if you don't want to. You can if you want to, but like you can also just jump in and make mistakes and have fun. It's good too.
Yeah, the phenomenon that Jill is referring to is often commonly referred to as the Mercer effect. It could as easily be called the Mulligan effect or the B. Dave Walters effect, whatever it might be. But I think all of those DMs and any DM in any either podcast or streamed game would tell you, yeah, no, you're not going to be any of us. But you know what we can't do? We can't run your home game with your friends, with their characters, because each table is different. Every experience is different. So just, yeah, you'll never be them. But guess what? They'll also never be you if you're scared of DMing because I'm not going to be Brendan Lee Mulligan. No, you're not. Open up your player's handbook, get a decent enough grasp on the rules, grab your dice, grab some friends, run a game. Just do it.
Or you could just be a hanger-on like me and join everybody else's game. It's great. Genuine recommend. If you've got patient friends, dive in.
And on that note, I think that's a good place to leave things. We're going to call it here and see everybody in 2 weeks for the next episode of Oops All Bards. And then back here 2 weeks after that for another episode of the Barbecue. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Again, I am Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, and it's been a pleasure. See you in 2 weeks.
Oops All Bards is created, GM'd, and directed by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. This episode was produced, edited, and sound designed by Nate Runkle. Oops All Bards stars Ashley Banks as Belle Cernamiel, Ann Coleman as Clarice Sauercloud, Ross Curry as Andric Harrowhold, Chris Klinecki as Poochton Ruckus, Bob Killian as Kilonian Stumps, featuring Paige Klinecki as the voice of the Bark Buttons. The Oops All Bards theme song is by Bob Killian with additional lyrics by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. Oops All Bards is executive produced by The Porch Room. We are part of the Porch Room Network on Spreaker Prime. For more information, visit oopsallbards.com. Thanks, and be sure to subscribe to Oops All Bards on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcatcher of choice. We'll see you next time.